There are two photographs of Amara Vale that the internet decided it couldn't live without that October. In the first one, she's standing at the head of a wedding aisle in a dress that took 8 months to make, holding flowers she no longer had anyone to hand to. And here's the thing people noticed about that first photograph. She doesn't look shocked, not even a little. There's no surprise on the face of a woman who has just been told something she apparently already knew. Somewhere she'd been hiding it for 5 years. There's only understanding. The second photograph was taken 11 seconds later. It's the reason her phone had 61 missed calls by morning. It's the reason 3 catering staff lost their jobs for filming it and a 4th made a small fortune selling it. And it's the reason the most dangerous man in the city, a man whose name people lowered their voices to say, showed up at her studio the next morning to return a single earring. But to understand the second photograph, the one where Amara Vale is gripping the lapel of the most feared man in town, kissing him in front of 212 guests, you have to understand the 5 years that came before it. And you have to meet the man who believed those 5 years made her his. Her name was Amara Vale. And she designed interiors for people who had too much money and not enough taste. She was good at it. She was better than good. She was the kind of good that made clients cry during the reveal. And then apologize for crying. Her studio, Vale Studio, sat above a ceramics shop in the old part of the city. And it smelled like coffee, sawdust, and possibility. Durain Cross had walked into that studio 4 years before the wedding. And he had walked in the way buildings get built, with a plan. He was a property developer with a reputation for charm, a jawline that photographed beautifully, and a habit of making women feel like the most important person in every room as long as they remembered. He was the architect of the room's importance. They dated for a year, they got engaged the year after. And for 5 years, because counting began before the ring, Amara lived inside a very particular kind of weather. Not cruelty, nothing that would make a stranger wince. Just weather, small corrections delivered kindly. Always with her best interests at heart. That color is ambitious for your skin tone. Love, are you sure you want to wear that silhouette to his firm's gala? These people are very image conscious. Maybe let me do the talking tonight. You know how nervous you get in rooms like this. You're being difficult again, Amara. I love that you're spirited. But there's a time and a place. He had never once called her unattractive. He'd been cleverer than that. He simply taught her gently, one season at a time, that everyone else was secretly thinking it, but the world was a harsh place that judged women like her. And that she was lucky, complicated, high-maintenance lucky, to have someone willing to manage her through it. She was a gifted designer who made grown men cry with a swatch book. And she had somehow been talked into believing she was too much. In every direction for the ordinary world. The wedding was in a glass pavilion on the grounds of a country house. 212 guests. If you counted the caterer's nephew, white roses, champagne, the kind of happy that photographs well, Amara stood at the altar in the dress that took 8 months to make. And Dorian stood across from her, and the celebrant opened his mouth to begin. Dorian stepped forward first. Everyone, he said. Just that one word. The band stopped mid-count. The celebrant lowered his book. There's been a change of plans. A nervous laugh rippled through the guests. Someone in the third row started clapping. Then stopped, because Dorian wasn't smiling. I'm leaving, Dorian said, with Isla, and then, because he apparently couldn't help himself, he added the part that would make the rounds as audio clips for a month. She's the one I actually want. From the second table, Isla Whitmore stood up. She was a junior partner at Dorian's firm, a fact Amara had found out 3 weeks earlier and had, in a moment of exhausting optimism, decided to interpret as nothing. Isla walked to the end of her row, chin lifted, like an actress who'd been waiting for her cue all night. She had been. The silence that followed had texture. You could hear ice melting in glasses, and Amara Vale, the woman who had spent 5 years learning to be smaller, quieter, easier, did something that surprised even herself. She laughed, not a dramatic laugh, not a sob in disguise, a short, breathy laugh of pure recognition. The laugh of a woman who has just found out the joke was on her and decides, on the spot, that it's the funniest thing she's ever heard. Then she slid the ring off her finger. It came away easily. It had always been a half size too big sized. She now understood with terrible clarity. For a slimmer finger Dorian had been expecting her to have, she threw it at him. It bounced off the lapel of his jacket and rolled across the polished floor before coming to a stop at Isla Whitmore's feet. Isla did not pick it up. Nobody picked it up. And then Amara did the only thing left that could still surprise a room full of people who had just been through a surprise. She started walking, not toward the exit. Everyone expected the exit. She walked the length of the aisle. Past her own bridesmaids, past her mother's face. Past the celebrant who looked like he'd been struck by lightning mid-sentence, and into the back corner of the pavilion, where a table had been set for the guests who'd arrived late and been seated awkwardly. One man sat there alone. He was in his mid-30s. Wearing a dark suit with no tie, and he was nursing a glass of water he hadn't touched. Watching the entire disaster with the calm of someone watching a storm from a dry porch. He was a business acquaintance of Dorian's. The kind of acquaintance you don't invite but can't uninvite. Dorian had once told Amara, in his managing voice, to stay away from him at parties. He's not our kind of people, love, he's complicated. Dante Marchetti was not complicated. He was simple in exactly the way a loaded gun is simple. He ran the Marchetti Consortium, which owned hotels, shipping lines, and at least 3 things that had never had a press release. Below the consortium, in the parts of the city that didn't make the brochures, his word was considered more binding than a court ruling. The most feared man in the city. Sitting alone at a wedding he'd clearly only attended out of obligation, Amara Vale stopped in front of him. Every head in the room turned. Somewhere a phone came up. Because of course it did. She reached down, took hold of the lapels of his jacket, the expensive wool, the quiet power of it, and pulled him to his feet. "Excuse me," she said, to no one in particular. "I need to borrow the most dangerous man in the room." Then she kissed him. It lasted only seconds. Long enough for the room to stop existing. Long enough for her to register, with dawning horror and a strange, fizzing thrill, that Dante Marchetti was kissing her back, his palm settling against the small of her back the way a hand finds a railing in the dark, to keep her from falling. Not to hold her in place. He tasted like coffee and patience. He did not pull her closer. He did not stake a claim. He just stood there, kissing her back, as though it were the most reasonable thing that had ever happened to him. She pulled away first. Her fingers were still twisted in his lapel. For the first time since Dorian had taken the microphone, heat climbed to her cheeks. What in the name of all that was sane had she just done? Dante looked at her, no smug smile. No triumphant glance toward the groom. His dark eyes stayed on her. And for a moment it seemed like the 200 people in the room were an inconvenience he was politely ignoring. That somehow made it worse. Or better, she couldn't decide. Behind her, a voice cracked the silence like a dropped pane of glass. "What the hell do you think you're doing with her?" Dorian had abandoned Isla at the front of the pavilion and was striding toward them. Face rigid, his hands were shaking. Amara had given him performances over 5 years, tears, guilt, contrition, and none of them had made his hands shake. Dante released her at once. He looked at Dorian. His voice was calm, almost bored. "You walked away from her. I thought you were finished." "That doesn't make her yours," Dorian spat. "No," Dante said. He turned his gaze to Amara. "It makes her hers." Something in her chest stopped, not romance, not yet. She had kissed the man because she was furious, humiliated, and desperate to make one decision Dorian hadn't scripted. She barely knew him beyond his reputation. But after 5 years of being gently, kindly, patiently managed, Dante Marchetti had just done something Dorian had never once done. He had left the choice with her. Dorian stepped closer. "Amara, you're embarrassing yourself." There it was. The old mechanism. Not "you hurt me," not "why did you do this." You're embarrassing yourself, as if Dorian could abandon her at their own wedding, and still hold the copyright on how she was allowed to react. She looked down at her bare ring finger. A strange calm settled over the fury. "No," she said. "I think that part already happened." Dorian's jaw went tight. "You're emotional." "We'll discuss this when you've calmed down," Amara almost laughed. Even now he believed there would be a discussion, a private room. A patient explanation, an apology arranged to protect his reputation, and that she would be expected to listen. "No, Dorian." He stared. It might have been the first time all evening she'd said his name without begging for an explanation. "We won't." She turned toward Dante. For one terrible second, she feared he might misunderstand and offer his arm like a victorious rival collecting his winnings. He didn't. He simply moved aside, the smallest step, leaving the path open. The choice was hers. Again, Amara walked past him behind her. Dorian called her name twice. She kept walking. Dante did not follow her toward the doors. And that surprised her more than the kiss had. At the doors, Amara glanced back once. Dorian stood in the wreckage of the future he'd discarded, furious because she had refused to stay inside it. Isla Whitmore stood a careful distance from him. Nobody's first choice in that moment, and Dante Marchetti stood several feet away. Perfectly still, his attention not on his rival, on her. Not hungry, not possessive, just watching. Like a man memorizing something, and for the first time that day, Amara didn't feel like the woman someone had rejected. She felt like the woman who had finally walked away. There's a difference, and she could feel it in her own shoes. By 9 the next morning, she'd learned that humiliation travels faster than sympathy. Her phone had 61 missed calls and 89 messages. Someone had filmed Dorian leaving with Isla. Someone else had caught the ring bouncing off his lapel. And 3 separate guests had filmed the kiss. The clearest footage, which she watched exactly once, showed her gripping Dante Marchetti's lapel while he looked down at her like she was the only person in the frame. "Excellent," she muttered, and locked the phone. Very dignified, Dorian's messages had progressed with impressive predictability. Anger, then negotiation. Then concern. "Amara, call me, 8:06. We need to talk about what you did." 8:12. "You're not thinking clearly." 9:03, "That man is dangerous." 11:47, and then, at 11:58, "I'm worried about you." That one made her laugh so hard she had to put the phone down. In 5 years, Dorian Cross had never once been worried about her. He'd been worried about the optics of her. There's a difference, and she'd finally heard it. Isla's message was shorter. "Kissing him for the cameras doesn't make you the winner of anything. He'll forget your name by spring. Meanwhile, you still have to live with yourself." Amara deleted it. By 10:30 she was at the studio because work was the only place where nobody asked how she was feeling. Her studio assistant, a woman with the survival instincts of a cat, said nothing about the wedding and simply put a coffee on her desk. For nearly 2 hours, Amara buried herself in fabric samples and revised drawings. And it almost worked. Then the front door opened. Dante Marchetti walked in, and the atmosphere of the studio rearranged itself around him the way air rearranges itself around a storm. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie. He looked almost absurd among the shelves of ceramics, the textile books, the handmade lighting samples, a Wolf in a garden. Her stomach tightened. She'd spent all morning wondering whether he'd call. Apparently, the answer was no. He simply appeared. "Mr. Marchetti? Miss Vale." He reached into his coat pocket and placed something small on her desk. A single gold stud with a citron stone. "You dropped this last night." She touched her empty earlobe. "You came across the city to return an earring?" "Yes. That's all." One dark eyebrow lifted. "Were you expecting flowers?" "No." "Good. I dislike predictable gestures." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Dante's mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to remind her forcibly that this was the man she had kissed in front of her entire wedding. "You do realize what you did last night," she said carefully. "In front of roughly 200 people, I do, and..." He considered her. And for a moment the dry humor went out of his face, leaving something quieter underneath. And I'd do it again. The room seemed to become smaller. Amara picked up the earring, turning it over in her palm. Because looking at him was suddenly too much. Thank you, she said. He nodded and turned toward the door that irritated her, for reasons she couldn't explain. Dante, he stopped. About last night. You don't owe me an explanation, she found herself saying, because she'd rehearsed a version of this conversation all morning and needed him to know she wasn't going to be the embarrassing one. I assaulted your personal space in front of 100 witnesses. If you want to pretend it never happened. You kissed me without asking, he said. And then you stopped. So did you. I did. He looked at her a moment longer. Dorian tells you I'm not who you think I am. Dorian says a lot of things when he's frightened, she said. Should I be frightened of you? He considered the question soberly, as though it cost him something to take it seriously. Not of me, he said. That's not comforting. I know. She appreciated that, oddly. She'd spent 5 years with a man who comforted her the way you comfort a spooked horse. Smoothly. And in service of the ride. Keep the earring somewhere safer, Dante said. And open the door. I usually do, she said. Yesterday was not a usual day. That almost smile appeared again. I noticed. And then he left. Amara stood motionless for several seconds. Her phone began vibrating. Dorian. She declined the call without hesitation. Then looked toward the door where Dante Marchetti had disappeared yesterday. She'd kissed a dangerous man because she wanted Dorian to react this morning. The dangerous man had made her curious without trying to provoke anyone at all. That, she realized, felt considerably more dangerous. 3 days later, Amara discovered that curiosity is harder to ignore than heartbreak. Dorian's calls had slowed but not stopped. Isla had gone quiet. Vale Studio had become her refuge again. Full of deadlines that demanded decisions more useful than wondering why Dante Marchetti had kissed her back. Unfortunately, the Marchetti consortium had become impossible to avoid. A hotel renovation she'd consulted on months earlier needed revisions. And by Thursday afternoon, Amara found herself in one of Dante's corporate towers, with material samples spread across a conference table. Dante entered near the end of the meeting. Everyone changed. Backs straightened. Conversations shortened. A senior executive who had spent 20 minutes arguing about limestone suddenly agreed with everything she said. Dante barely seemed to notice. Amara did. She had known he was powerful. She hadn't understood how quietly that power operated. When the others finally filed out, she stayed behind to gather her samples. He glanced at her. You've been staring at me. I've been observing. That sounds more professional. It was intended to. She slid a fabric book into her case. Then stopped pretending she hadn't been waiting for an opportunity. Why did you kiss me back? His expression didn't change. Because I wanted to. That's your entire explanation? You asked a question. You didn't ask for footnotes. She closed her case harder than necessary. So I was convenient. No, he said. And something in his voice made her look up. He leaned one hand on the conference table. Do you remember the Calder House project? She frowned, then she did. 2 years earlier. Vale Studio had been invited to a preliminary design consultation for a luxury Marchetti property. Amara had been younger, nervous, and profoundly unimpressed by what they'd been shown. You were there? I own the building. I know that. I mean, in the meeting, I was at the back by the window. The lead designer spent 40 minutes explaining why everything was sophisticated. Oh, God. Then you looked at the presentation and said it looked like the lobby of a bank built by people who hate smiling. She remembered the silence that followed. She also remembered Dorian's lecture that evening, delivered in his managing voice. You can't talk to people like that. Love, powerful men remember disrespect. Well, she said slowly. Apparently he was right about one thing. Yes, Dante agreed. I remembered. Did you fire them? No, I made them redesign it. He watched her steadily. You were the only person in that room who wasn't trying to figure out what answer I wanted before speaking. Do you know how rare that is? People rehearse for me, all day, every day. People walk into my buildings having rehearsed. You walked in and told the truth because it never occurred to you to do anything else. For once, Amara had no clever response. He hadn't remembered her because she was Dorian Cross's fiancée. He hadn't mentioned her body, hadn't measured her against a slimmer woman who didn't exist. He had remembered something she said when she didn't even know he was listening. So yes, Dante said, straightening. Watching Dorian's face was enjoyable. She rolled her eyes. Romantic. But that wasn't why I kissed you back. The room suddenly seemed smaller. Then what was? His eyes held hers. I already told you because I wanted to. This time, the answer landed in a different place entirely. Amara picked up her case. You're very annoying. So I've been told. Rarely to my face. She laughed in spite of herself. Dante opened the conference room door for her. And he made no attempt to touch her as she passed, in the corridor. Amara realized something unsettled for years. Dorian had trained her to wonder whether she was too loud, too difficult, too much. Dante Marchetti had remembered her precisely because she had refused to make herself agreeable. And for the first time, Amara wondered what would happen if she stopped trying to be smaller on purpose. Dorian Cross arrived at Vale Studio the following Monday without an appointment. Amara was reviewing stone samples when she heard his voice at reception. Tell her it's important. For 5 years. That tone had meant she was expected to rearrange whatever she was doing. This time she kept working, when Dorian pushed past the assistant and appeared in her doorway. She looked up slowly. You're trespassing. His expression tightened. Can we not behave like strangers? We're not strangers, she said. Strangers are people I haven't asked to leave yet. He closed the studio door behind him, an old move, designed to make the room feel like his, and lowered his voice into its concerned register. I came because I'm worried about you. About the Romang? She almost said it. And caught herself. About Marchetti, you don't know what kind of man he is, and you do? I know enough. There was something beneath his anger she hadn't noticed before. Fear Dante's name didn't nearly irritate Dorian. It unsettled him. He's using you, Dorian said. This is about me. That made her laugh. He stared. You think this is funny? I think it's fascinating that you still believe everything I do is about you. His face hardened. You kissed my biggest rival at our wedding. Our cancelled wedding. To punish me. Yes, she admitted. The admission stopped him. She had no reason to rewrite it into something prettier. I was furious. I wanted to hurt you. It was impulsive and immature and extremely public. Then I went home. And now you're seeing him. I've spoken to him. Don't be naive. There it was. That patient. Superior voice he used whenever he wanted her to distrust her own judgment. He doesn't date women like you. Silence. Dorian seemed to realize too late what he'd said. But Amara had heard variations of it for years, in every costume the weather could wear. That color is ambitious for your skin tone. Are you sure about that silhouette? These people are very image conscious. You know how difficult these evenings are for you. He had rarely called her unattractive. He'd been cleverer than that. He had simply taught her to assume everyone else was thinking it. Dorian stepped closer. You know what I mean. Yes, Amara said quietly. I finally do. His expression softened. Mistaking her calm for injury. Amara, don't. You think Marchetti actually wants a woman like you? The question landed exactly where he intended it. Only this time it found scar tissue instead of an open wound. I don't know what Dante wants, she said. Dorian's mouth curved faintly. Like a man who'd won, then she looked directly at him. But I finally know I don't want you. The satisfaction vanished from his face. For several seconds he said nothing. She understood then that he'd expected anger. Maybe tears, even revenge, made sense to him. Because revenge still put him at the center of her emotions. Indifference was different. You'll regret saying that. No. I regret how long it took. She opened the studio door. Leave. Dorian stared at her. Then walked out without another word. 3 days later. Vale Studio lost the Renfield contract. The client apologized repeatedly, blaming a sudden restructuring. Amara might have believed them if the project manager hadn't quietly called her afterward. Dorian Cross had contacted one of the investors. Questions had been raised about her professional stability following the wedding scandal. She sat alone at her desk after closing, staring at the termination email for 5 years. Dorian had made her small with words. Now that the words no longer worked, he was reaching for something else. Her livelihood. Her phone lit up. Thursday dinner. She stared at it. For one reckless moment she wanted to tell Dante everything, and he had enough power to make Dorian regret breathing in her direction. That was precisely why she didn't. She typed, "I'm choosing the restaurant." His reply came almost immediately. "Obviously." She smiled despite herself. Then she reopened the cancelled contract. Dorian wanted her frightened enough to run toward a stronger man. He still hadn't understood. She wasn't looking for someone to manage her life. She was learning how to manage it herself. Finn Barrett entered Amara's life carrying architectural plans, 2 coffees, and absolutely no fear of flirting with her. He was the lead architect on a boutique hotel project she'd recently secured. And unlike most men in her professional orbit, Finn never disguised interest behind ambiguity. By their 4th meeting, he placed a coffee beside her drawings. Oat milk. Extra shot. She looked at him suspiciously. "You remember my coffee order?" "I design buildings for a living. Remembering structural details is important. My coffee order is load-bearing," she said. "The entire studio depends on it." He laughed. Across the studio, someone cleared his throat. Amara turned. Dante stood near the entrance. Since their dinner, he had been appearing more often, never constantly. Never without some plausible connection to a project. The Marchetti Consortium was considering Vale Studio for 2 properties, which gave him legitimate reasons. Today, however, Amara suspected legitimacy was struggling. His gaze moved from her, to the coffee, to Finn. Introductions were made. Finn offered his hand without hesitation. "Dante Marchetti. I've heard a lot about you." "I imagined so," Finn laughed. Dante didn't. Amara bit the inside of her cheek. For the next 20 minutes she discussed the hotel plans while Dante reviewed samples for an entirely different project. At least he pretended to. When Finn mentioned the cafe where he'd bought the coffee, Dante looked up. "Their coffee is terrible." Amara stared at him. Finn shrugged. "She seems to like it. She has low standards in coffee." "Careful," Amara said. Lowering her pencil, Dante returned his attention to the samples. "I'm being generous." 2 days later, Finn asked her to dinner. Not ambiguously, not disguised as business. Friday night dinner. No floor plans, Amara smiled, before she could answer. A familiar voice came from behind her. "Which restaurant?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Do you materialize whenever another man asks me somewhere?" "Not whenever. The timing is remarkably consistent." Finn named the restaurant. Dante considered it. "The chef is overrated." "The sauce is a cry for help." Amara turned around fully. "What's wrong with the restaurant, really?" "It has excellent reviews." "Reviews can be purchased." She stared at him. Then understanding arrived slowly, delightfully. "Are you jealous?" Dante looked at her. "Don't be absurd. I ran a background check." "You ran a background check on a man who asked me to dinner?" "Standard procedure. He could be dangerous. He designs buildings. Buildings are where threats live." Amara's mouth twitched. "And what did your terrifying intelligence network discover?" "That Barrett has no criminal record. His finances are clean. His former business partner describes him as, quote, irritatingly ethical. And he volunteers 2 Saturdays a month restoring old buildings." "He sounds terrible." "I found it deeply suspicious." She laughed, actually laughed. And the expression on the most intimidating man she'd ever met became almost offended. "You investigated my date. I verified that a man attempting to spend time with you isn't a threat to you. I can do that myself." "I know." That answer softened her amusement. Dante wasn't apologizing for caring. Neither was he suggesting she required his permission. He had done the one thing Dorian had never managed. He had looked after her without claiming the right to. She stepped closer. You know, I might say yes to dinner. Yes. His jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, and you're not going to stop me? I could secure every street corner in this district before sunset. That wasn't my question. I know. He paused. But who you have dinner with isn't mine to decide. The teasing left her face. There it was again. Power held deliberately behind a boundary. Dante could investigate Finn, insult his coffee, and invent hypothetical business connections. But he couldn't command her to choose him. That frustrated him. She could see it. And somehow that restraint affected her more than jealousy ever had. Dorian's jealousy had always made her feel smaller. Dante's jealousy, ridiculous as it was, revealed something entirely different. For all his money, his armed men, his whispered authority, Dante Marchetti had finally met a situation his power could not solve. Amara had to choose him, and for the first time, the possibility that she might was beginning to frighten him. 2. The second contract disappeared on a Wednesday morning. This time Amara didn't need anyone to explain why. The client had been enthusiastic 48 hours earlier. Then one of Dorian's development partners joined the financing group. Then one of Dorian's development partners joined the financing group. And suddenly she was considered too exposed to reputational complications. She read the email twice, then she forwarded it to her attorney. Not to Dante, her attorney. That distinction mattered. By noon, anger had replaced disappointment. By 3, she had reorganized the project calendar, called 2 prospective clients, and told her staff that no one's job was in danger. At 4:30, Dorian Cross walked into her studio. She didn't bother standing. Leave. We need to talk. No. You need to leave. His eyes swept across the studio. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? For a moment, she genuinely couldn't speak. Then she laughed, his expression darkened. You think this is funny? You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. And then you ran straight into the arms of a criminal. You brought Isla to our wedding? You told 200 people she was the one you actually want. You sabotaged my contracts because you can't stand that I stopped waiting for you. He stepped closer. People think I'm weak because of you. No, Dorian. People think you're weak because you can't accept that the woman you threw away stopped waiting. She stood. And now you're interfering with my business because humiliating me privately doesn't work anymore. I was protecting those investors. From an interior designer, from your instability, the word was deliberate. Another attempt to make her question whether her anger was evidence that something was wrong with her. It didn't work. Get out. He moved around the desk. Stop acting like you're powerful all of a sudden because Marchetti wants to sleep with you. Get out. Dorian. She stepped away from him. He caught her wrist. Everything stopped. His grip wasn't brutal, that almost made it worse. It was casual. Automatic. The physical version of every correction he'd made for 5 years. The assumption that if she resisted, he was entitled to hold her in place until she listened. Let go. She said. He didn't. The studio door opened behind him. Dante entered. Took in the scene once, and his expression barely changed. That frightened Dorian more than shouting would have. Dante crossed the room, no threats, no dramatic violence. He simply took Dorian's hand, removed it from Amara's wrist with the unhurried care of a man disarming a child, and positioned himself between them. She said no. Dante said quietly. You don't touch someone after she says no. Dorian stepped backward, then found his footing. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? To play protector, to take what's mine. Dante said nothing. He's stealing my fiancé, Dorian said, looking past Dante at Amara. You don't have a fiancé. You know what I mean? No. Amara stepped around Dante. And she could feel the room's power shift. The way you feel a floor change underfoot. I know exactly what you mean. Dorian stared at her. You still think I was something you owned? His jaw tightened. You can't steal something that walked away from you, she said. Silence. Dante didn't add a word. He didn't need to, for once. The most powerful man in the room wasn't the one ending the confrontation. Amara was. She pointed at the door. If you contact my clients again, my attorney will handle it. If you come here again without permission, I'll call the police. And if you touch me again, she said, letting the words land one at a time. You'll deal with me, not him, me. Dorian looked between them. Something bitter crossed his face. Then he left. The door closed. Amara exhaled. Dante's attention dropped to her wrist. Are you hurt? No, he nodded. Nothing more. No promise to destroy Dorian. No demand that she let his security guard the studio. That restraint made her suspicious. What are you thinking? She asked. He looked toward the door. Several things you would object to. Then don't do them. His eyes returned to hers. All right. The simplicity of it struck deeper than she expected. You're just agreeing. You said no, Dante Marchetti said. And that was the whole of his answer. Amara looked at the place on her wrist where Dorian's fingers had been. Then at the man who could command companies and security forces and an empire, whose true boundaries she was only beginning to understand. He possessed enough power to frighten Dorian without raising his voice. And yet, when Amara established a boundary, Dante stopped. It wasn't power that separated the two men, she realized. It was what each of them believed power entitled him to do. The investigation began without Amara asking for it. 3 weeks after Dorian grabbed her wrist, a financial review connected to one of his largest developments uncovered discrepancies. Then another appeared. Fees routed through shell companies. Invoices for work nobody could point to. Liabilities hidden from investors, quietly. The way you hide a crack in a wall you intend to sell. By the time Amara heard about it, attorneys and auditors were already involved. Dante told her over dinner, a small place she'd chosen. With candles and a wine list he pretended to tolerate. What did you do? She asked. One eyebrow lifted. Interesting that you assume I did something. Dante, I requested information concerning an investment that affects the consortium. He set down his fork. The irregularities were already there. I simply made sure that several more people are now looking at them. She studied him. She had gradually understood what being Dante Marchetti actually meant. The consortium's polished corporate empire was only the visible layer. Beneath it ran security networks, political relationships, financial leverage, loyal men who asked few questions, and an underworld powerful enough that people lowered their voices when discussing him. If Dante wanted Dorian destroyed, he probably wouldn't need to touch him. A cancelled loan, a frightened partner, a vanished alliance, enough pressure in the right places. And Dorian's empire could collapse like a house of cards in a draft. Can you ruin him? She asked. Dante didn't insult her with false modesty. Yes. How quickly? He paused. Quickly. And are you going to? He watched her carefully. I haven't decided. I have. His expression cooled slightly. Amara. No. She reached across the table, not touching him, but making sure he understood. If you destroy him because he hurt me, then my entire future still revolves around Dorian. I kissed you because of him. I won't love you because of him. I won't have my business saved because of him. And I won't wake up one morning knowing you burned his life down as a romantic gesture to me. He interfered with your company. Your attorney is handling it. He put his hands on you. You told him what would happen if he did it again. I heard you. I know, Dante said quietly. And something dangerous passed behind his eyes. I don't think you do. She understood. There were boundaries Dante respected because she demanded them. And there were boundaries the man considered absolute. She reached across and touched his hand. Then let's hope Dorian finally learns something. Months passed. The investigations widened without Dante's intervention. Investors withdrew, projects stalled. Dorian's carefully manufactured reputation began collapsing beneath problems he had created himself, one hidden liability at a time. Isla Whitmore stayed beside him at first. She believed in the version of Dorian, who had chosen her over a bride in front of 200 people. Then photographs appeared of Dorian outside Vale Studio. Stories circulated about his calls eventually. Isla understood what Amara already had. Dorian hadn't chosen one woman because he loved her more. He needed possession, and Amara mattered to him more lost than Ayla could ever matter won. She left him before the first snow. By then Amara barely noticed. Vale Studio had recovered both lost contracts through legal settlements and gained 3 larger ones through referrals. Amara hired 3 designers and stopped apologizing when clients called her ideas bold. Dante remained in her life, not as revenge. That distinction had changed everything. They argued about restaurants. He continued to hate Finn Barrett's cafe even after Finn started dating someone else. Amara discovered Dante secretly preferred old jazz to the fashionable clubs his empire owned. He discovered she stole fries from his plate after insisting she wasn't hungry. Their attraction stopped feeling like a weapon pointed at Dorian. It started feeling like a compass pointing at each other one evening. Amara found Dante watching her while she reorganized samples in the studio. "What?" she asked. "At first," he said, "I enjoyed watching him lose his mind." She gave him a dry look. "Romantic." "I wasn't finished." He stepped closer. There was no audience now. No wedding, no rival watching from across the room. His hand settled lightly against her waist, waiting. Never pulling. "Then at some point," he said. "I stopped caring whether he was watching at all." Amara's smile disappeared. That was the confession. Not that Dante could protect her. Not that he desired her. Not that he could destroy her ex with a phone call. He wanted her when there was nobody left to defeat. She looked up at the man feared by half the city and understood the strange limitation he had willingly accepted. His power could secure a building. It could protect an empire. It could make enemies vanish from boardrooms and alliances collapse overnight, but it couldn't make Amara love him. That choice belonged entirely to her, so she made one. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. This time, there was no anger in it. 1 year later, Dorian Cross no longer mattered. His empire hadn't collapsed because Dante destroyed it. It collapsed because investors stopped trusting numbers. Dorian could no longer explain. Projects disappeared. Partners distanced themselves. The influence he had treated like permanent currency evaporated with remarkable speed. Isla was long gone. Amara rarely thought about either of them. Vale Studio now occupied twice its original space. 4 designers worked under her name. And clients came specifically because Amara's work was bold. Warm and unmistakably hers. She had stopped apologizing for that. 2. Dante remained Dante. The consortium had expanded internationally. Men twice as loud still grew careful when he entered a room. His legitimate corporations continued to grow, while the darker empire beneath them remained something respectable society preferred not to examine closely. With Amara, however, power worked differently. He never interfered with her contracts. He never decided where she could go. He never asked her to soften an opinion because important people were listening, and when they disagreed, Dante sometimes looked irritated, and then he listened anyway. One evening, they stood alone on the terrace of his penthouse after dinner. The city spread out below them like a circuit board. "Do you regret kissing me?" he asked. "The first one," Amara said. "Certainly the first one." One eyebrow lifted. "There have been enough since then to require a specification." The first kiss was anger. She stepped closer. The second was curiosity. Another step. The third was definitely your fault. That is historically inaccurate. "It's a matter of public record." Dante's hand settled at her waist. "And this one?" Amara remembered the woman standing in a glass pavilion a year earlier, wondering whether being abandoned proved every insecurity Dorian had carefully planted inside her. She wasn't that woman anymore, not because Dante had taught her she was beautiful. Not because a powerful man had chosen her. Somewhere between rebuilding her studio, enforcing her boundaries, and refusing to let revenge become her future, Amara had finally stopped asking whether she was too much. She put her hands around his neck. "This one is mine." And she kissed him. There was no Dorian watching. No humiliated bride, no audience, no revenge. Only choice, months later. When Dante Marchetti asked Amara Vale to marry him, on a Tuesday, with no ring. Because he knew she'd prefer the moment to the gesture, she made him wait exactly 11 seconds before she said yes. Long enough for panic to flicker across the most unshakable face in the city. Long enough for him to believe, briefly, that he had finally encountered something all his power couldn't hold. Not because marrying the city's most feared man proved she had won. Dorian had stopped being the measure of victory long ago. She said yes because the man everyone feared had never once asked her to shrink so he could feel tall. And Amara Vale would never make herself small again, not for him, not for anyone. Certainly not for a man who had spent 5 years believing that patience made him her owner and learned, in front of 212 guests, that it made him the man she walked away from. The second photograph went viral. Of course, that's how these things work. But the photograph Amara keeps framed in her studio is a different one. The two of them, years later on a terrace. Her laughing at something he said while the most dangerous man in the city, mid-eye roll, utterly undone, loves her exactly as she is somewhere. Dorian Cross is still explaining why none of it was his fault. Amara Vale stopped explaining a long time ago.